A short film is often made to be shown at a film festival or competition, made by students or aspiring filmmakers. Examples of this type of media are There's a Man in the Woods, Wirecutters, and The Bathtub. A feature-length film is usually a widely advertised, often 60 to 140 minute long, big-budget production. Most of the time they are shown in cinemas and are made by large production companies like Universal Studios, such as Logan or The Darkest Hour. Sometimes these movies can also be made by smaller studios, like Saw. An issue-based TV drama is a show based around tackling real-life issues, bringing attention and publicity to the problem. Examples of this are Brexit, the Uncivil War, and Manhunt. A serial drama is a television show which updates with a new episode on a weekly/monthly basis and often follow the general dramatic cliches. Examples include Emmerdale and Game of Thrones. This is why the plot of the film occurs. It's based upon the cause and effect and the motivation of protagonists. For example, Luke Skywalker fighting Darth Vader because he thinks he killed his father. These are theories on how a movie is constructed. Disruption, struggle, resolution involves the film beginning normal, then the norm is disrupted, resulting in a struggle of a binary opposition, and finally the resolution, where everything returns to normal. For example, in Spider-Man, everything starts normal, the Green Goblin causes chaos, they fight, Spider-Man wins, and everything returns to normal. A stereotype involves a common and often racist or offensive belief of how all people sporting a specific physical feature act. Characterization involves character development. For example, an example of this is Apu from The Simpsons. An open movie is a film that ends with a cliffhanger of sorts. The story wasn't exactly finished, while a closed movie is the opposite, when the story actually ends at the end. An example of an open movie is The Cloverfield Paradox, while an example of a closed movie is Iron Man 3. Single-strand structure involves having only one story to follow, while multi-strand involves lots of stories to follow. An example of single-strand is the movie Nine, and an example of multi-strand is Sully. A realist movie is a movie which is completely believable and could be taking place on the planet, while an anti-realist movie isn't believable. An example of a realist movie is St. Vincent, while an example of an anti-realist movie is Interstellar. Costumes can be used to develop a character, like coloured hair, a beard, exotic costumes, and notable features. An example of this is Maze Runner: The Death Cure, Lawrence, who sports a facial disfigurement. Settings can also present characters. Criminals could live in a rundown area or super luxury abodes. It could also show us something about their personality, more likely their ego. For example, in Chappie, the gangsters live in a rundown abandoned site. This is the way something is filmed, creating different effects and emotions for the viewers. For example, in Jaws, there's the get out of the water dolly zoom scene, and in Taxi Driver, there's the master shot in the diner scene. Lighting is also used to create a certain effect. It can present horror or romance in low lighting, or comedy and drama in lots of lighting. For example, in the horror film Sinister 2, there are lots of dark scenes to present horror. Or for an example of a bright scene in The Cat in the Hat with the slow drive to present comedy.
Hey, yeah, I wanna shoot, baby. Shoot, shoot, baby.
Diegetic sound involves a sound which the fabricated characters can hear in their own world. Gunshots, stereos, and setting-specific sounds are all diegetic. For example, Deadpool in the beginning sitting on the bridge where the stereo is playing Shoot.
If it comes at all.
Non-diegetic sound involves sound only audible to the audience, used to impose a feeling or emphasize a scene.
There's always been a bagging.
Music can also be used to impose a feeling or emotion on a viewer. In horror, music can be used to create an immense amount of suspense. In an action sequence, music can be used to make the scene seem more badass. For example, Lion King, the opening, Circle of Life, or Thor Ragnarok, the immigrant song. horror genre involves scaring the audience with over-the-top gore, jump scares, and twisting, turning plots. An example is Jigsaw. Wikipedia depicts science fiction as a genre that uses speculative, fictional, science-based depictions of phenomena that are not fully accepted by mainstream science. There are many types of sci-fi film, like time travel, space travel, and AI takeover. An example of this is Blade Runner. A general characteristic of horror is there is usually an antagonist, often with an attribute of madness or a sinister motive, often possessing a disfigurement. Freddy Krueger is an example of this, with his facial disfigurement and his knives for fingers. There is also usually a main protagonist. We will also see a pattern of this protagonist being female, resulting in the final girl cliché. An example of this is Ripley in the Alien series. As well as these main characters, we'll find a number of others, including friends of both the villain and hero. An example of this is Dr. Karen Fletcher, the therapist from Split. While many of sci-fi films involve an antagonist, the disruption of the norm can be produced by a potentially deadly situation. For example, Passengers. A common character in many sci-fi movies is a robot companion. These robots are sometimes the main characters of this genre and begin to exhibit human-like emotion, otherwise they serve as a companion to the protagonist. An example of a main character is Chappie, and an example of a companion is K2SO from Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Sci-fi movies are often lonely, in which the main character does not have a crew or friends with them during the events of the movie. This means that the protagonist will often become depressed or have many moments of loneliness, such as in Gravity or in The Time Machine. A horror movie is supposed to scare the viewer. A horror film must be scary to be good, but must also possess a generally twisting story and develop the protagonist and antagonist to an extent. Examples of highly rated horror movies include It and Hereditary. The audience expects to be taken through an exciting journey through space and/or time. They expect to be shocked and amazed at incredible special effects and a twisting maze of a plot. Stories about time travel or aliens, etc. should leave the viewer in awe. Examples of an alien movie are Mars Attacks, a subversion sometimes seen in horror is the protagonist actively killing the threat. For example, Happy Death Day. Another recent subversion is the inability to see the antagonist, due to visual contact alone becoming a death sentence. This in turn means that sometimes the audience never see the antagonist. Examples of this include Bird Box. And an example of visual contact being a death sentence while the audience is able to see the antagonist is the movie Slender Man. A final recent subversion is the use of technology as the base of the film, such as Unfriended. One subversion of sci-fi, which is only seen near the ending of the film, is the resultant twist that in fact the alien robot takeover was already successful, with the protagonist and us are shocked by. An example of this includes World's End. A different subversion is the transfer from AI companion to hostile robot. An AI which earlier seemed friendly and helpful suddenly becomes a dangerous entity with ulterior motives. An example of this is David from Prometheus and the main protagonist from Ex Machina. In the beginning few minutes of The Blob, we see a couple of young adults in a cliché make-out point setting. It opens with a close-up. The two first characters we meet are the classic lady killer jock and the innocent girl.
The Blob.
This is a common setting and characters pair for a horror film, as it develops the character straight away. We immediately assume both teenagers are popular, and after seeing the guy clearly lie to her about never bringing anyone else to the spot, we have a negative feeling towards him. We can also hear crickets and general ambient sound until the meteor hits, which induces non-diegetic, cliché, sci-fi, horror-like music. The plot of the film is obviously going to be about the blob, which is inferred as inside the meteorite.
It's not just like a big ball of jelly.
The film ends with the blob being
That
frozen.
looks pretty
I'm surprised no one's come in to look at what we're doing already. You're not even using it. They'll come off and be like, exactly. Do you still play that? Because if you play that, I'll download it. Penguin! 4-star. I'm going to download it if you like. Okay, right. The film ends with the blob being frozen and the public scrambling to find out fire extinguishers to continue keeping the creature from thawing. We barely see the blob in this scene, yet we still hear a calm urgency in the actors' voices. This tells us that the creature has been stopped, but the threat isn't quite gone. In the final sequence, we see the crate holding the blob being airdropped into the Arctic, as the words "the end" appear on the screen, closely followed by a question mark. This ending is open, letting the audience know that while everything seems safe, this might not quite be the end of the blob. This is reinforced by the positive music stopping abruptly, being replaced by a sinister music score. It Follows is a feature-length production produced by lesser-known production companies. It opens with a prologue showing a teenage girl seemingly trying to get away from something. The entire first half of the prologue is taken in a single shot in the form of a slowly advancing long shot, almost, but not quite as if we're looking through the person pursuing the girl's eyes. This makes the audience feel on edge, as the camera slowly pursues the clearly terrified girl, as she stares directly into the camera on multiple occasions. There is a constant ominous music score, getting louder and more intense as the time of the girl's death draws nearer. This also puts us on edge, as we reach the final climax of the gruesome image of the girl's brutalised corpse.
What's the matter? What's going on? Annie?
The film ends with a tracking two-shot of Jay and Hugh walking hand in hand as they walk slowly down the street in silence. After cutting from in front to behind, then back in front, we see a figure following them slowly in the distance. This shows that the creature will follow relentlessly as the screen goes black. It is an open ending, as we don't know what will happen, although it is inferred that Jay will flee the creature all her life until it catches her, ultimately killing her. The scene has only diegetic sound in the form of quiet ambient sound. This scene will impact the viewer with a feeling of despair and sadness, as we know that Jay will die, despite her struggles to flee. Many people say that the creature symbolises death itself, as while you can take steps to delay it, its coming is inevitable. This is an interesting subversion to the usual horror ending, as there is no satisfying payoff. The creature is not stopped, and Jay will die. This is in contrast to most other horror movies like Prometheus or The Babadook, in which the antagonist is killed or subdued. It Follows and The Blob share many similarities and differences. For example, It Follows has a creature which is unstoppable. It can be slowed down, but it cannot be stopped, constantly pursuing the main protagonist. The Blob, on the other hand, seems unstoppable until it is found that it can't stand the cold. This is a similarity, as both creatures are inhuman and seem to be impervious to harm, inevitably killing its target. Another similarity is that both movies use mainly teenagers/young adults as its main characters, making the concept more personal to parents and youths alike. There are also sexual tones in both, but a difference with this is that the sexual scenes produce the cause and effect in It Follows, which contrasts with The Blob only being used to produce character and atmosphere. Another difference between the opening scenes of the two films are the time it takes to get sinister. In It Follows, we begin straight away with a terrified teenage girl fleeing her home, eventually being horrifically murdered on a beach, while in The Blob, the film takes a few minutes to give a sense of horror. "2001: A Space Odyssey" is a feature-length film released in 1968 and met with wide success. It opens with a scene showing the dawn of man. Apes beginning as a victim of nature, being killed by the wildlife over time, find a monolith has miraculously appeared. One ape touches the monolith and is later followed by the camera as after messing with a pile of bones, it picks a large bone up, swinging it and eventually smashing the other bones. It presents the moment man evolved to use tools. There is music used, which is now known as a very cliché sci-fi sound, but back then would have been ingenious. It presents a sense of awe and wonder as the ape makes the greatest discovery in history. This whole scene makes the viewers gasp and feel a sense of wonder as they watch the dawn of man. The movie ends with Dave, now an old man, presumably close to death, waking up in his room. A new monolith is revealed to have appeared directly in front of him. The camera focuses back on the Dave, showing that he has transformed, or perhaps evolved, into a different being completely, becoming the strange image of an unborn fetus, perhaps symbolising life and innocence. He is then transported over Earth, looking down upon it, as if keeping a watchful eye over it. The scene feels transcendent, but is also known as an extremely confusing scene, leaving viewers with conflicting theories on the meaning of the ending. District 9 opens in the form of a corporate video/documentary, in which we are told the origin of the race of aliens, or prawns, coming to Earth and being segregated in society, forced into a slum in the city of Johannesburg after being discovered weak and afraid in the hovering alien ship. After seeing the aliens being left in slums and disallowed from using the same buses and entering certain public areas, we realise that they are being treated exactly how people of colour were treated in the 1900s, being treated as degenerates, as if they were a lower form of life, which we now see as a wrong way to act in modern times. This scene makes viewers feel very sorry for the aliens and shows us how modern racism can go unseen, especially when we believe that it's the right way to act.
Now, to everyone's surprise, the ship didn't come to a stop over Manhattan or Washington or Chicago, but it instead coasted to a halt directly over the city of Johannesburg. The doors didn't open for 3 months. It just hovered there. Nobody could get in. And they eventually decided, after much deliberation, that the best thing to do would be to physically cut their way in.
We were on the verge of first contact. The whole world was watching. Expecting, I don't know, music from heaven and bright shining lights.
There's a lot of moisture in here. Good, go slowly. Oh my god.
The creatures were extremely malnourished. They were very unhealthy. They seemed to be aimless. There was a lot of international pressure on us at the time. The entire world was looking at Johannesburg, so we had to do the right thing. The government then established an aid group that started to ferry the aliens to a temporary camp that was set up just beneath the ship.
We didn't have a plan. There was 1 million of them. So what was a temporary holding zone soon became fenced, became militarized, and before we knew it, it was a slum.
Well, the truth is, nobody...
District 9 ends with a return to the found footage type of filming, in which we see that the colleagues of main character Wikus have no idea what happened to him, and while hoping he will return, they accept that they most likely won't see him again. We also see his wife, hopeful that he is still alive, due to a small metal flower made from trash being mailed to her earlier, believing that Wikus had sent it to her. This is revealed to be true in a particularly hard-hitting and emotional scene as the camera cuts to showing a prawn bending another piece of trash into a flower shape, making us realise that Wikus has fully transformed into an alien. This is a scene which makes the viewers upset and feel sympathy for Wikus, as it is clear that although his body has changed drastically, his human mind remains.
You know, that they didn't even do a good job of hiding it.
I found this at my front door, as though somebody had just left it there. My friends say I should just throw it away because it's just a piece of rubbish. That couldn't possibly come from him. I know it's true.
District 9 and 2001 A Space Odyssey are different films entirely, one involving a movie about alien refugees living on Earth in slums, as a man undergoes a horrifying transformation into an alien trying to prevent it, while the other film uses elements like space travel and AI to create an intelligent ship, resulting in an AI antagonist, and an ending which hurts the brain to think about, as one of the most confusing and intriguing movies ever made. I chose these two films to compare to present just how drastically different and wide the range of a sci-fi movie can be. One has a straightforward and compelling story, fairly easily understood with small bursts of action and changes in perspective, while the other takes everything we know about evolution and throws it out the window, producing a movie which raises more than triple the questions it answers, leaving conflicting people with conflicting theories on the end alone. It also represents how sci-fi movies can depict issues in society, as District 9 has very clear tones of racism, xenophobia and social segregation, allowing us to see how easily these issues can go unnoticed by placing them on an alien race. A final difference between the movies, however, is the emotional impact on the viewer. 2001 presents a huge sense of awe and mind-blowing concepts, while District 9 ends in an extremely lonely and upsetting way, as there isn't particularly a resolution to Wikus' transformation at the end, resulting in a cliffhanger. While 2001 doesn't really have an open ending, but somehow the story doesn't quite seem just over yet. The aim of a horror movie is to scare the viewer, to make them jump in their seats or to make them squirm and grimace. This effect is usually achieved through an antagonist. While sometimes subverting from this convention, most horror movies have an antagonist, hell-bent on hurting or killing the protagonist, scaring them as much as they can on the way. Movies like The Blob or It Follows present this, as they both have villains in the form of strange, unexplained creatures. However, while the Blob kills and eats anything and everything it catches, the creature from It Follows kills almost ritualistically, hunting down a specific person relentlessly. This shows that while some people may say that the antagonist aspect of horror is cliché, often the villains will have clear differences which sets them apart from other antagonists. For example, Freddy Krueger kills unsuspecting people in their dreams, while Jason Voorhees hacks at campers with his machete in the real world as a silent, almost unstoppable killing machine. Sci-fi is a rather wide genre, ranging from robots to alien invasions, from flying through space to time travel. This makes it fairly difficult to summarise, apart from explaining that it is an imaginative range of speculative fiction and concepts, made to bend the laws of physics and to boggle the viewer's mind. It often follows the narrative theory of disruption, struggle, and resolution, with the characters beginning in the norm, the situation then changing to a usually deadly level, the solution is delivered, and the phenomenon / doomsday / invasion / mass extinction event is prevented. Horror and sci-fi can often be mixed, in movies like Alien, A Quiet Place, Annihilation, and The Thing. These types of mixes also almost always possess an inhuman antagonist, whether it's explained if it came from Earth or not. These two genres are a perfect mix, as it allows such imaginative concepts to be created. Horror movies can be scary, but when not bound by the realm of science, they can be absolutely horrifying. On their own, the difference between the disruption in horror and sci-fi is often that in horror, the problem is a bloodthirsty antagonist, while in sci-fi, the disruption can often be a malfunction, phenomenon, or doomsday event. For example, in Passengers, the disruption involves Jim Preston waking up from cryosleep decades early, while in the movie It, the disruption is the arrival of the evil entity Pennywise.